Hi, I'm Maya. I'm a 22-year-old college student working part-time at a local coffee shop to help cover my tuition. I thought I had a pretty normal family. Sure, we weren't super close, but I figured that was just how some families were. But that Tuesday afternoon in March changed everything I thought I knew about my family, and honestly, about myself. It started so innocently. I was rushing to get ready for my evening shift when I realized my phone had died. My mom was in the kitchen making dinner, so I asked if I could quickly borrow her phone to check what time my manager wanted me to come in. She handed it over without even looking up from chopping vegetables. I unlocked her phone. She'd never been secretive about her passcode, and opened her messages. But as I was scrolling to find my manager's contact, I accidentally swiped the wrong way. Instead of opening the Messages app, I somehow ended up in her photos. And that's when I saw something that made my stomach drop. There was a folder I'd never seen before. It wasn't labeled anything obvious, just Family 2019-2024. My finger hovered over it for a second. Something felt off about discovering a family photo folder I didn't know existed, but curiosity got the better of me, and I tapped it open. What I saw inside made me feel like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. Photo after photo of family trips I'd never seen. My mom, dad, and sister Emma standing in front of the Golden Gate Bridge, the three of them at what looked like a fancy resort somewhere tropical. Emma blowing out birthday candles on what was clearly not the small family dinner I remembered from her last birthday. My parents and sister at ski lodges, beach resorts, city landmarks, dozens and dozens of photos spanning years. And in every single one, I was nowhere to be found. My hands started shaking as I scrolled through them. There were photos from last Christmas that showed a completely different celebration than the quiet morning I remembered. Photos from Emma's graduation party that apparently happened at some fancy restaurant, not the casual backyard barbecue I'd been told about. Vacation photos from places I'd never even heard them mention wanting to visit. I felt physically sick. Each photo was like a punch to the gut, showing me a version of my family's life that I apparently wasn't part of. The timestamps told a story I'd never known existed. While I was working extra shifts to help with family expenses, or staying home to study for finals, or spending holidays alone because everyone was too tired for big celebrations, they were out living this whole other life. The most devastating part wasn't just that I wasn't in the photos. It was how happy they all looked, how natural and relaxed they seemed together, like they were exactly where they belonged, and there was no empty space where I should have been. What I found in that folder wasn't just photos. It was proof that I was never really part of this family. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Because that's exactly how I felt in that moment, like I'd been living as a ghost in a house where everyone could see right through me. I quickly closed the folder and found my manager's number, sent a quick text about my shift, and handed the phone back to my mom. She smiled and thanked me, completely oblivious to the fact that her phone had just shattered my entire understanding of our family dynamic. The rest of that evening was a blur. I went through the motions at work, making lattes and taking orders, but my mind was racing. I kept replaying those photos, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Had I somehow forgotten about these trips? Was there some reasonable explanation I was missing? But deep down, I knew the truth. Those weren't spontaneous weekend getaways. The resort photos, the fancy restaurants, the perfectly coordinated outfits. These were planned vacations, big celebrations, important moments. And somehow, I had been systematically excluded from all of them. When I got home that night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to remember the last time my family had invited me on a real vacation, the last time I'd felt truly included in something important. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't remember because it had never really happened. The next morning, I knew I had to say something. I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen what I'd seen. During breakfast, while Emma was scrolling through her phone and my parents were reading the news, I decided to test the waters. "Hey, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "I saw some photos on your phone yesterday when I borrowed it. That trip to San Francisco looked amazing. When did you guys go?" The silence that followed was deafening. My mom's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. Emma's thumb stopped scrolling. My dad's newspaper crinkled as his grip tightened. "Oh, that," my mom finally said, not meeting my eyes. "That was just a quick weekend trip, last-minute thing. You were busy with midterms, remember?" But I did remember my midterms. They'd been in November, and according to the timestamp on those photos, their San Francisco trip had been in January, 2 months later. "What about Emma's birthday party?" I pressed on. "The one at that fancy restaurant?" Emma finally looked up from her phone, her expression defensive. "That wasn't a big deal. Just dinner with a couple friends. You never seem interested in that kind of stuff anyway." "I would have liked to be invited," I said quietly. "You're being dramatic," Emma shot back. "We didn't think you'd want to come. You're always complaining about spending money on restaurants." That's when my dad chimed in with his usual solution to family tension: complete silence. He buried his face deeper in his newspaper, effectively removing himself from the conversation. "I'm not being dramatic," I said, feeling my voice start to shake. "I'm just trying to understand why there are all these family activities I never knew about." "We didn't want to bother you," my mom said, finally looking at me. "You've been so stressed with school and work. We thought you needed space." The gaslighting was subtle but unmistakable. Suddenly, my exclusion was being framed as consideration for my feelings. My absence from family events was being rewritten as my choice, my preference, my fault. "When have I ever said I didn't want to spend time with family?" I asked. "You're always working," Emma said, "or studying. You never have time for us anyway." "Because I'm helping pay for things around here." The words came out louder than I'd intended. "I work extra shifts to help with household expenses. I've been contributing to this family financially for 2 years. And we appreciate that," my mom said quickly, "but that doesn't mean we have to plan our lives around your schedule." There it was. The truth, spoken so casually it took a moment to register. They didn't plan their lives around my schedule because they'd been planning their lives without me entirely. I sat there for a moment, processing what had just happened. In the span of 5 minutes, my family had confirmed everything those photos had suggested. They'd been living a separate life, taking vacations, celebrating milestones, creating memories, all while accepting my financial contributions and letting me believe I was a valued part of this family unit. "So, you've been taking family trips without me," I said slowly, "while I work extra hours to help pay for household expenses because you didn't want to bother me with invitations." "You're twisting this around," Emma said. "We're not responsible for your feelings." "You're right," I said, standing up from the table. "You're not." But as I walked away from that breakfast table, I started to see the pattern more clearly. This wasn't just about recent trips or birthday parties. This was about years of being systematically excluded while being expected to contribute. Years of being made to feel like my absence was my choice when it had never been my choice at all. I went to my room and started thinking back over the past few years with new clarity. The family dinner I'd missed because I was working a double shift. Had that really been a last-minute thing, or had it been planned around my work schedule specifically? The Christmas morning that felt rushed and awkward. Had there been another celebration I wasn't invited to? The inside jokes I never understood, the references to conversations I'd never been part of, the way they sometimes looked at each other like they were sharing a secret. I realized I'd been living in this family like a tenant who occasionally got invited to join the landlords for dinner. I was welcome to contribute financially, to help with chores, to be present for the mundane daily routines. But when it came to the actual joy, the celebrations, the memory-making moments, I was somehow never quite included. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became, not just angry, hurt. Deeply, profoundly hurt in a way I'd never experienced before. It's one thing to feel left out occasionally. It's another thing entirely to discover that your exclusion has been deliberate and systematic for years. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I walked through our house with fresh eyes, really looking at the evidence of our family life. The living room had a wall covered in family photos, arranged chronologically from my childhood to recent years. I'd walked past that wall hundreds of times, but I'd never really studied it. What I saw made my chest tight with a pain I couldn't even name. The pattern was so clear once I was looking for it. In the earliest photos, baby pictures, elementary school events, middle school graduation, I was front and center, a cherished part of every family moment. But as the photos got more recent, I started appearing less and less. By the time I got to the most recent section, covering the last 3 years, I was barely present at all. There were professional family portraits where I was clearly missing, holiday photos where it was just the three of them, vacation pictures I'd never seen before, showing adventures I'd never even heard mentioned. It was like watching myself slowly fade out of my own family's story. The photo wall told the truth my family had been hiding. I hadn't gradually become too busy for family activities. They had gradually stopped including me in family activities. And somehow, they'd managed to convince me that this was normal, that this was my choice, that this was just how families worked when kids grew up. But looking at Emma's recent photos, I realized that wasn't true. Emma was the same age I'd been when I started disappearing from family pictures, but she was still front and center in every shot. This wasn't about kids growing up and becoming independent. This was about me, specifically, being slowly edited out of my family's life. I sat on the couch, staring at that photo wall, and felt something shift inside me. For years, I'd been trying to figure out why I always felt like I was on the outside looking in, why family dinners felt strained, why I never seemed to know what everyone else was talking about, why I felt like I was constantly trying to earn my place in a family I'd been born into. Now I knew. It wasn't in my head, it wasn't my fault, and it wasn't something I could fix by trying harder or being more available or contributing more money. I couldn't keep pretending this was normal. I couldn't keep accepting their explanations and their gaslighting and their casual dismissal of my feelings. Something had to change. That photo wall would become evidence in what happened next, because I was about to stop being a passive observer of my own exclusion and start taking control of my life in a way I'd never imagined possible. But first, I needed to understand exactly how deep this went. If my family had been living a secret life without me, I needed to know just how extensive that life had been. I needed proof, documentation, evidence that even they couldn't explain away, and I knew exactly where to start looking. I spent the next 3 days methodically building my case like I was preparing for trial. That photo wall had opened my eyes, but I needed more than just visual evidence. I needed a timeline, documentation, proof that even my family's master-level gaslighting couldn't explain away. I started with their social media accounts. My mom had always been pretty active on Facebook, and Emma lived on Instagram. My dad wasn't much of a poster, but he was tagged in plenty of photos. I went back 3 years and started screenshotting everything, organizing the evidence chronologically. What I found was staggering. Trip after trip, celebration after celebration, family moment after family moment, all documented online for their friends to see, but somehow kept completely hidden from me. I created a spreadsheet because that's the kind of person I am when I'm angry and hurt. I documented every single family activity I could find evidence of, cross-referenced with my own calendar and work schedule. The pattern was damning. They weren't just excluding me from random spontaneous activities. These were planned events, booked months in advance, deliberately scheduled during times when they knew I'd be unavailable, or made unavailable. Take Emma's birthday last year. I remembered it as a quiet family dinner at home because Emma said she didn't want anything big. But Instagram told a different story. There was a whole album from her party at Romano's, the expensive Italian place downtown. 20 of her friends, a custom cake, professional photos. The timestamp showed it happened on a Saturday when I was working a double shift, a shift I'd picked up specifically because my mom had mentioned they could use help with some unexpected expenses. Now I realized those unexpected expenses had probably been for Emma's party. I'd worked 12 hours to help pay for a celebration I wasn't invited to attend. The ski trip was even worse. I found photos dated from spring break of my junior year. I'd stayed home to work and save money for textbooks while my family spent a week in Aspen. Aspen. Not some local mountain, a luxury ski resort that probably cost more than I made in 2 months. And I'd been home eating ramen and covering household bills while they were staying in some mountain lodge that looked like it belonged in a magazine. I pulled up my bank statements from that week. Sure enough, I'd transferred money to my parents' account to help with emergency home repairs, while they were literally posting photos of themselves in hot tubs with mountain views. But the discovery that really broke something inside me was the Christmas evidence. Last Christmas, I'd worked both Christmas Eve and the day after Christmas because my manager had been desperate for coverage. I'd felt guilty about missing family time, but my parents had assured me it was fine, that they were just planning to have a quiet holiday anyway. The Facebook album titled Christmas in Napa told a very different story. My family had spent Christmas week at some luxury wine country resort, professional family photos by a fireplace, fancy Christmas dinner, wine tastings, spa treatments. A whole magical Christmas experience that looked like something out of a Hallmark movie. While I was serving coffee to grumpy customers and missing what I thought was just another low-key family Christmas, they were living it up in wine country, probably toasting to their successful deception. I printed everything out. Bank statements, social media screenshots, work schedules, text message chains. I organized it all into a folder that looked like something a lawyer would prepare for court, because in a way, that's exactly what this was. I was building a case against my own family, but I needed more than just my perspective. I needed witnesses, people who could confirm that this pattern of exclusion was real and deliberate. So I started making some uncomfortable phone calls. Mrs. Peterson, our next-door neighbor for the past 15 years, was my first call. She'd always been friendly, the type who noticed everything that happened on our street. "Oh, Maya, honey," she said when I asked about noticing my family's travel patterns. I always wondered about that. They'd load up the car with suitcases, and I'd wave goodbye, but you were never with them. I just assumed you were away at college or work. "Do you remember how often this happened?" I asked. "Oh, quite regularly. Maybe every few months. Sometimes more. They've got quite the travel bug, your family, always heading off somewhere exciting." Next, I called my cousin Jake, who lived across town. Jake and I had been close as kids, but we'd grown apart in recent years. When I asked him about family gatherings, his response was telling. "Family gatherings?" he said, confused. "Maya, your family hosts stuff all the time. Just last month there was that barbecue for your uncle's retirement, and Emma's graduation party was incredible. Your mom went all out." "I wasn't at those," I said quietly. The silence on the other end of the line stretched uncomfortably long. "What do you mean you weren't there?" "I mean I was never invited. I didn't even know they were happening." That can't be right. I just assumed you were busy with college stuff." But it was right, and Jake knew it. After that conversation, he started sending me screenshots of family group chats I'd never been added to. Group chats where my family planned gatherings, shared photos from events, and coordinated gift-giving for birthdays and holidays. Group chats that included cousins, aunts, uncles, and family friends, but somehow never included me. The most painful witness conversation was with my former high school friend Sarah, who now worked at the resort where my family had spent Christmas. I'd reached out to her on a whim, wondering if she might have seen them there. "Oh my God, Maya, yes! Your family was here over Christmas week. They were so sweet. Your mom kept talking about her daughters and how proud she was. I kept waiting for you to show up, but when you never did, I figured you must be with your boyfriend's family or something." "What exactly did my mom say about her daughters?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "She talked about Emma's internship and how well she was doing in school, and she mentioned having another daughter in college but said you were really independent and preferred to do your own thing for the holidays. She made it sound like it was your choice." There it was. Even to strangers, my absence was being reframed as my preference. My mom had crafted a narrative where I was the independent daughter who chose to skip family events, not the excluded daughter who was never invited in the first place. But the most devastating piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. While organizing my room, I found an old external hard drive I'd forgotten about. When I plugged it in, I discovered a backup of my phone from 2 years ago, including text messages I'd long since deleted. Reading through those old messages was like watching a masterclass in manipulation. There were dozens of conversations where my family would mention being too tired for big celebrations, suggest keeping things low-key, or ask me to work extra shifts to help with various expenses. All of this happening right around the same times I now knew they were planning major trips and celebrations. One text chain particularly stood out. It was from around Emma's graduation, where my mom had asked me to work a weekend catering gig to help with unexpected graduation expenses. But the Instagram photos showed Emma's graduation party had been planned for months, complete with a professional photographer and custom decorations. I'd literally worked a weekend job to help pay for a party I wasn't invited to attend. The financial documentation was the most damning part. Over the past 3 years, I'd contributed over $8,000 to household expenses, emergency funds, and family costs. Meanwhile, based on the evidence I'd gathered, my family had spent at least $15,000 on trips and celebrations that I wasn't included in. I wasn't just being excluded from family events. I was financially subsidizing my own exclusion. By the end of that week, I had a comprehensive file that told a story no amount of gaslighting could explain away, but I still needed to understand the why behind it all. What had I done to deserve this treatment? When had I become the family member who was good enough to financially contribute, but not good enough to actually include? The answer came during what would be our last family dinner. It was a Sunday, and my mom had suggested we all eat together as a family. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I agreed because I'd decided this would be the night I presented my evidence. I brought my folder to dinner, but I didn't pull it out immediately. Instead, I listened to my family chat about their weeks, their plans, their thoughts about everything from work to weekend activities. I listened for any mention of upcoming events, any hint about future family plans. Nothing. They talked around me like I was a pleasant house guest who might be interested in their lives but wouldn't necessarily be included in their futures. Finally, I decided to test them one more time. "So," I said casually, "any fun plans coming up? Family trips or anything?" The look that passed between my parents and Emma was subtle but unmistakable. It was the look of people who shared secrets, people who had information they weren't planning to share with me. "Nothing major," my dad said. "Just the usual stuff." "Yeah," Emma added, "probably just going to have a quiet few months." But I'd already found evidence of their spring break trip. Hotel reservations in Hawaii, booked and paid for weeks ago. A trip scheduled during my finals week, when they knew I'd be completely unavailable. "Before we finish dinner," I said, reaching for my folder, "I want to share something with all of you." The change in atmosphere was immediate. My mom's fork paused midway to her mouth. Emma's casual scrolling stopped abruptly. My dad's newspaper, which he'd been reading at the dinner table because apparently that was acceptable family behavior, lowered just enough for him to make eye contact. "I've spent the past week doing some research," I continued, opening the folder and laying out the first batch of photos. "These are from your trip to San Francisco. According to the timestamps, this happened during my midterms week, not after." I placed the next set of photos on the table. Emma's birthday party at Romano's. This was planned months in advance, according to the reservation confirmation I found in Mom's email. My family sat in stunned silence as I continued laying out evidence like a prosecutor presenting a case. Bank statements showing my financial contributions, screenshots of group chats I'd never been added to, witness statements from neighbors and family members, a comprehensive timeline showing 3 years of systematic exclusion. "This isn't about me being too busy or preferring to do my own thing," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "This is about you deliberately planning a family life that doesn't include me, while expecting me to financially contribute to expenses that fund your exclusion of me." My mom was the first to speak, and her response was exactly what I'd expected. "Maya, you're embarrassing us with this investigation. This is family dinner, not a courtroom." "You're right," I said. "This isn't a courtroom. In a courtroom, you'd have to answer for taking money from someone while deliberately excluding them from the benefits of family membership." Emma slammed her hand on the table. "We never asked you to contribute to anything. You offered." "I offered because you told me the family needed help with expenses. I didn't realize I was paying for my own exclusion." My dad finally spoke up, his voice tired. "Maybe we made some mistakes in how we communicated about plans." "Mistakes?" I interrupted. "Dad, you booked a trip to Hawaii for spring break. During my finals week, after accepting money from me for emergency home repairs last month. That's not a communication mistake. That's deliberate deception. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in years, my family had no explanation, no excuse, no way to make this my fault, or my choice, or my misunderstanding. Finally, my mom tried one last manipulation. We were trying to give you space to focus on your studies and your independence. Stop, I said firmly. Just stop. I know what this is, and so do you. You wanted the financial benefits of having an adult child at home without the social obligation of actually including that child in your family life. I stood up from the table, folder in hand. I sent you all a message yesterday. I told you not to contact me again. Looking at all this evidence, I now know that message was 3 years overdue. Emma's voice was shrill as she called after me. You can't just cut off your family over some vacation photos. I turned back to face them one final time. This isn't about vacation photos. This is about 3 years of lying, manipulation, and financial exploitation. This is about making me feel crazy for noticing my own exclusion. This is about systematically erasing me from my own family while keeping me around to help pay the bills. Where will you go? My mom asked, and for a moment she almost sounded genuinely concerned. That's not your problem anymore, I said. You've made it very clear that my life isn't your concern, so don't make it your concern now. As I walked toward the stairs to pack my things, I heard Emma mutter something about me being dramatic and selfish. I heard my parents start to argue about whose fault this was, how they should handle it, what they should tell extended family. But for the first time in years, their opinions about my behavior didn't matter to me, because I finally understood that I wasn't the problem. I wasn't too sensitive, too demanding, too difficult to include. I was just the family member they'd decided wasn't worth treating like family. The photo wall I'd stared at earlier that week suddenly made perfect sense. I hadn't gradually become less important to my family. My family had gradually become less of a family to me. They'd kept all the structure and financial benefits of having me around while systematically removing all the emotional connection and inclusion that makes someone actually family. But now I was going to do something they'd never expected. I was going to remove myself from their carefully constructed narrative entirely. Not just the photos, not just the events, but the whole relationship. For the first time in 3 years, I was going to stop letting them have it both ways,